Hi, I'm Dr. Mike DiTolla. Welcome to the One Shade Show. Any dentist knows that there are 16 shades on a standard shade guide, but this is the show where we say to 16 shades, and we only talk about one shade, and its name is Universal. As a young boy, I could only dream of a world where I would never need to take out a shade guide for posterior composite restorations. And who, pray tell, made that dream come true? None other than Kuraray Noritake, the company that has brought us such game-changing legacy products as Panavia and CLEARFIL SE Bond. One has nearly eliminated post-operative sensitivity with our restorations, while the other has kept millions of crowns on short, over-tapered preps. And with the introduction of CLEARFIL Majesty ES-2 Universal, go ahead and set your mind to blown right now. The Kuraray principle is intelligent simplification, the process of making dentists more efficient with no loss in restoration quality. I know what you're thinking. Mike, enough words. Let's see some before and after pictures. All right, settle down. To see those cases, we're going to bring on one of the clinicians who has had the chance to put Majesty Universal through its paces for the last few months prior to product launch. Today's featured clinician is Dr. Troy Schmedding. Troy is an accredited member of the AACD and practices in Walnut Creek, California, and his practice is called Family Dentistry of Walnut Creek. Troy, welcome to the One Shade Show. I gotta say, if I had my AACD accreditation, my practice name would be something like World's Best Aesthetic Dentistry, and aesthetic would be spelled with an A instead of an E. So I'm wondering, for somebody so accomplished as you, why did you decide not to go with some highbrow aesthetic name?
At the end of the day, I'm a dentist that really still enjoys seeing young kids to adults, and I enjoy doing crown and bridge and various components of just your basic direct resin restorations. And, cosmetics, when it's thrown in, I certainly talk about it a lot, and we do get referrals for particular reasons or other. But at the end of the day, I'm a family dentist, and I enjoy seeing that whole facet of dentistry. And that's kind of the basis. It's not a really exciting answer, and but that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it all.
But it is. I mean, it's a good answer. It's the truth. I mean, there's always like modern, innovative dentistry, and people trying to say something about quality. Even though they're probably not supposed to say something about quality. I just think, to me, it shows somebody who's confident and self-assured in their skills and is happy. Isn't trying to exclude people by saying, "Hey, man, if you don't want veneers, there's actually a dental practice in Newport Beach where I am called Simply Veneers." And I'm always wondering, do they really do nothing but veneers? And how busy can you be? I don't think anybody can be that busy. Well, as a means of introduction, Troy, to let our audience get to know you, we always start with a segment called A Shady Past. This is where we want you to tell us about any felonies that you've had, crimes you've committed, any stints in federal prison. Maybe you have a secret family living in St. Louis. I don't know, but this is the time for you to get that off your chest. And if you don't have anything that dramatic, we'll just settle for something super embarrassing from your personal life.
Fortunately, or pleading the fifth, maybe I should say, that I probably don't have a lot in my checkered past that would, potentially inhibit my future run for politics.
Well, what if I asked your wife? What if we decided to go through all these walls that you're putting up right here? What if I asked your wife something embarrassing about you? What would she say?
She would say my feet.
Oh, what's going on down there?
Yeah. Well, I was, in my younger life, a pretty athletic dude, and I played a lot of football, a lot of basketball, baseball. I did the whole gamut, right? And with that came a lot of abuse on the toes and the feet and the crooked toes and the calluses, and it's just not a real pretty sight. I've actually been barred from going to any type of pedicure with my daughter, who at one age thought that was kind of cool for her dad to go with her and get a pedicure. But when she saw my feet, it was kind of like, well, Dad, we'll catch you next time, sort of thing.
Yeah, your daughter used to think it was cool that you didn't have any toenails and all 10 toes were pointing in different directions.
Yeah.
But now, that must be like when you would walk in for a pedicure. to the woman who was ever doing it. It must be like someone comes into us where they need full mouth rehab, where you're just looking at them going, wow, okay, well, this is going to take a few appointments. I'm going to bring somebody over to make the financial arrangements for this pedicure, because this is not going to be your run-of-the-mill prophy here. All right. Well, you were nice enough, Troy, to share some cases with us today so we could take a look at Majesty Universal. And first of all, I want to say that it's interesting that as an accredited AACD member, and I don't know if everybody knows just how much work goes into that, but I can boil it down to 3 words. Direct composite veneers. That's one of the things you have to do it. So you're obviously very skilled with composite materials in your hand. And as somebody who's probably spent a lot of time layering composites, it's interesting to me that you're willing to try and interested in a universal shade material, because in one way it kind of goes against some of your training, but in another way, we're really just talking about posterior class 1 and class 2 restorations here, and we're talking about being efficient, in a family dental practice. Did you have any qualms about, starting to place a universal shade composite when you first heard about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit it right on the head. The first, as a trained guy with composites and shades and all kinds of stuff, yeah, it's definitely not your first choice would be to slam something in there that is a one-size-fits-all sort of thing. But it certainly is a composite that always compels me in terms of who's manufacturing this product. Because Kuraray's, they're known for their quality, their ability to produce great products. So that was my jumping off point. And the other thing is certainly a posterior composite. I mean, you can draw on it as much as you want and do as creative aspects as what you need. But the end result is you want something that's fairly good match most of the time, has a very high quality and physical features in terms of something that's going to stand up over time. And so, that was kind of my jumping in point to give this material a look-see. In this particular case here, for instance, this is just a simple amalgam replacement, broke out on the mesial aspect of that. So very narrow in width, very small in depth, so not a lot of removal of tooth structure. And as you can see, we walked through that process. We did a little bit of selective etching. We did a universal adhesive on this particular one. This was Universal Bond Quick by Kuraray. And I did a couple layers of the Majesty Universal, and as you can see, it blends rather well. And
yeah, it does.
I didn't do the ACD anatomy with tints and opacers, because I think the justice of this material is what are we going to do on an everyday basis, and I don't on an everyday basis put in tints and opacers and grooves into my composite. That doesn't make the composite better necessarily at the end.
And furthermore, if we're going to just bring the patient into this, and if you took an intro camera and say, would you like me to put some stain on this one to match the stain on the one behind it, they'd probably be like, I'm not the doctor, but can we remove the stain on the one behind it too at the same time? You're like, yes, we can do a preventive restoration with this. And you're right, that's a very narrow preparation. And that's one of the great cases for a universal material, right? Because when it's a narrow isthmus, it can pull color from both sides of the prep.
Yeah, I think you'll see that in a case here in a little bit, that you're going to tend to find that when they talk about a universal composite, it's great for me in about 70% of my cases. I mean, most of the stuff I'm doing, I can utilize that. Like in the next case that you'll see here in a minute, utilizing it in a class 5 is almost a no-brainer, because you have a lot of broad surface area you're trying to cover up. And those work really, really well with the ability for this material to draw out underlying tooth structure and blend really nicely. Okay, so this is a great case for a universal composite. If you take a look at the class 5, most of the times you're going to have a very broad surface area that you're removing. So you're pulling out a lot of that underlying tooth structure in terms of appearance. So as you can see in the finish slide here, it's a very nice, highly polishable material. Yes, I did go below the gum line. That's why you see red there for you people out there. That's not a tint or opaquer.
You also packed a cord. Anytime that cord comes out, there's a chance there's going to be some bleeding from the sulcus too.
Yeah. But as you can see, that material blends really, really well to the point of a critique level that is pretty much very absent to a patient. They'll never be able to see where that restoration was placed. But what I found with these universal material, the Majesty Universal itself, like I said, the smaller the restoration, the better blend you're going to get. Whereas with the Class 5 especially, it blends extremely well because you've got a lot of underlying tooth structure pulling out through the color of that restoration.
Exactly. So it's not like on a deep Class 1 or Class 2 where you might have 2.5, 3 millimeters of depth. You're never probably going to have something that deep on a Class 5. So not only is it pulling from the tooth structure on the mesial and the distal and the incisal, but underneath it as well, it's going to be pulling from that dentin. And look, if you look at that first bicuspid distal to it, that's got a Class 5 composite too. That's not a universal material, and it stands out. I mean, I'm not saying that's like looks awful either, but it definitely stands out way more than the universal you just put in.
Yeah, agree 100%.
All right, tell me about
here's
this
just here's a simple Class 2 on a premolar that we're working on, going to the interproximal portions of that. But this is kind of a funny tooth in itself that when we look at it, you'll see a lot of the striations in that enamel, much like a little bit of fracturing in the windshield, so to speak. But as you see, the material, the end result here after placement and contouring of that interproximal embrasure space, it blends extremely well. We kept it very small in terms of dropping of the box, and that isthmus replacement is very small. We took a little bit of those stains out. So the incorporation of that tooth in the blend is really a beautiful restoration.
And that's a really nice job, because you had, if we go back to this before, you can see the marginal ridge really doesn't line up with the molar. I can't tell if that's tipped to the distal and that's why it's not lining up, but you brought that marginal ridge up on the final, and so that's a thicker part of that composite, but still in that area, maybe it's picking up a little color from the adjacent tooth, but it didn't gray out in that marginal ridge. That looks really nice.
Yeah, I would say the exact same thing. I think it's picking up from probably some type of Emax on that posterior tooth here. I can't remember exactly, but certainly it's drawing a lot of that too. So the more contact this material has with tooth structure or even adjacent tooth structure, I think is really what the key to that blend is, and the ability to transfer light through it so nicely.
Yeah, that looks really nice. I know that you weren't able to find the before or for whatever on this, but I'll just assume there was an old amalgam here and some decay, and that you did it, and that you did exactly a DO. Right. Is that what's going on? Okay.
Yeah. But if you take a look at this, I mean, it's overall a very, very, very nice looking composite. But if you want to say it's 100% natural blend, there is definitely some contrast in terms of the opacity or the translucency of that material in relationship to the molar behind it. So is it a perfect match? No, but it got wider, it got larger, and that's the concept I'm talking about. So I guess my point in this, is this acceptable? It is 1,000% acceptable at the Family Dentistry of Walnut Creek, 100%. But as you as a practitioner out there, you may be thinking, oh, I can still see it a little bit. Yeah, so you got to have some realistic expectations of the term universal. It does have limitations to a certain degree, but at the end of the day, it's a very quality product with great physical properties, wonderful handling, and polishability is phenomenal with this. So that's really the nuts and bolts of a good long-term restoration too. So case in point.
I don't think there's anybody out there looking at this going, oh, that's not, except, I mean, you're not going to turn it in for, like, I'm not that AACD makes you do a DO on a first molar for accreditation, but okay, yeah, no, I get that you could have layered it with something else, but we're talking about efficiency, whether it's for the patient or how long we're going to have, the tooth open, and there's just something so beautiful about whether it's 70 or 80% of your cases being able to have just one shade for that instead of 16 Vita shades, and maybe having a couple that you had from before for those odd teeth where it doesn't quite match, or maybe the super wide ones. But I think the convenience, and as long as it's got, the physical properties that you like, and it handles well, and it polishes as smooth as the classic, ClearFil Majesty does. This is fantastic that they've figured out how to do this light diffraction and diffusion so that it picks up those adjacent colors. And so it sounds like it's really more than just like, I mean, if you're going to make a universal shade and not change the composite, I guess you would just make an A2. But technically there's more going on here so that it can have that kind of chameleon effect.
I think that's well said. I mean, most of us use an A2 composite. I mean, I would imagine that's probably the leading seller in the world of composites, an A2. But at the end of the day, yes, the universal mechanism mechanism, and the ability to blend will certainly broaden your A2 category, so to speak, with this universal composite. And it's really nice to have one composite that does a majority of your posterior work, and I think that's what we're talking about with this composite, in my opinion, is in the posterior. I'm assuming you could probably get away with some really nice class 3s, some smaller class 4s potentially, but the meat and potatoes of this composite for me to be is going to be in the posterior.
Yeah, and again, it's just great not to have to pull out the shade guide and have to pick one or keep all those in stock, because the D4 always expires before you get a chance to use it. You just end up using it for buildups under zirconia crowns. And so why have all these 16 shades? So I think this kind of, Kuraray calls it intelligent simplification, which is making dentists more efficient, procedures easier to do without a compromise in the overall quality of the restoration. In that respect, I think they've really hit their goal with Majesty Universal. Well, Troy, thank you so much for spending a little time with us today. Thanks for sharing about your feet, and thanks for letting us see a few of your cases. I hope to be able to make it up to Northern California soon and stop by. Maybe we can go to lunch.
I love that. Thanks again for your guys' time, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Troy. Well, that will about wrap it up for this episode of The One Shade Show. Remember, life gets easier when you only need one shade for your posterior restorations. Go to oneshade.show for more product information and to see additional cases by other great clinicians such as Jeffrey Hoos, Steve Schiffenhaus, and Richard Young. So on behalf of Dr. Troy Schmedding, Kuraray Noritake, Practice Passion, and myself, I want to thank you for your time and your continued commitment to quality dentistry.